Hi, welcome to Adams County Winery, located in Ortana, Pennsylvania, just 8 miles west of historic Gettysburg. Behind me, we have our tasting room, which is housed in a bank barn that was built in the 1860s. Our winery, however, is not quite as old as our bank barn. We are Pennsylvania's 5th oldest operating winery and the area's oldest winery. The winery was established in 1975, so we're very proud to have that kind of history, especially in such a historic area. Why don't you follow me and I'll show you around a bit. Now we grow 5 varietals of grapes here on our 12.5 acres. Seyval, Vidal, Cabernet Sauvignon, Chambourcin, and Lemberger. All that we produce here, we use to make our wines right here on site. Anything we don't grow, we source from local farms and wineries here in Pennsylvania. Our harvest season we just completed takes approximately 3 to 6 weeks, and it occurs in early September and can carry over into early October. When our grapes come in from being harvested, the first machine they meet is called the crusher Distemmer. Now I'm going to give you 2 seconds to guess as to what 2 functions the crusher Distemmer actually serves. 1, 2. Well, if you couldn't guess it, it crushes and destems the grapes. So all that occurs is we dump the grapes in whole cluster into the top of the crusher Distemmer. Inside the crusher Distemmer are a series of stainless steel paddles. They rotate. They knock the grapes off the stems. The stems are then kicked down to a collection bin where we reuse those stems later in our compost pile here at the winery. Then the crusher Distemmer does the second part of its job. It takes those grapes and crushes them into a nice pulp. For those of you unfamiliar with a fermentation process, it's pretty simple. Yeast eats the sugar in the grapes. There's natural yeast in our grapes, but we often add yeast strains to speed up the process of fermentation. Now, fermentation can vary between 1 to 3 weeks on a multitude of factors. Some of those factors may include the strain of yeast being used, the temperature of fermentation, or the sweetness of that juice. If we're gonna make a white wine with our white grapes, after the white grapes are done being crushed to a pulp in the crusher Distemmer, we're just gonna transfer that white pulp to one of our stainless steel tanks and begin the fermentation process. However, if we're gonna make red wine with the red grape pulp, we have to do one more step before we put it into a tank for fermentation and clarification. And what we do is we take something that looks like a giant potato masher and actually punch those skins and seeds back down into the juice until we reach that desired color.
And the fermentation is about finished, that's why it's still mushy. And then you have the potato masher.
Now, after the fermentation process has been completed in one of our stainless steel tanks or our open top tanks for the red wines, we have another byproduct of the fermentation process, and that is the creation of sediment. Now, sediment, it's harmless and it's completely natural, but we don't like things floating in our drinks. At least I don't anyway. So we're gonna do another step before we put the wine into the bottles. What we do is a natural clarification process where we just have the wine resting in one of these stainless steel tanks and allow, with gravity's help of course, that sediment to be pulled to the bottom of the tank. This will occur over several weeks. Then we'll pump the wine into a new clean open tank and allow this process to happen again. Now this can vary from a few weeks to a few months depending on the wine itself. Now, as you see beside me here, we have a tank coated with some ice on the outside of this tank. This is one of our cold stabilization tanks. So any wine has the ability to create wine crystals, which are harmless, odorless, tasteless. If you ever see them in the bottom of your glass or on the bottom of your cork, they're almost like a gritty, sugary substance. Completely harmless. In fact, cream of tartar is made from wine crystals. But again, we don't want these to end up in our wine. So what we do is a process called cold stabilization. And we allow our wines to drop to right above freezing temperatures. On the inside of this tank, those wine crystals, they form, they cling to the inside of the tank, but on the outside of the tank, this layer of ice forms. This will occur over a few weeks, allowing us to get rid of any possibility of wine crystals forming later on in your bottle. The process of cold stabilization varies from wine to wine, depending on a myriad of factors. But for most wines, this can occur anywhere from a few weeks to up to a month or more, depending on the wine. But by doing this process, it allows us to reduce the possibility of wine crystals forming later on in your bottle of wine. Now, another way to filter out some of that unwanted sediment and microorganisms in our wine is we run our wine through a cross-flow filtration system. This cross-flow filtration system has 3 tubes lined with spaghetti filters. As the wine courses through those tubes, those spaghetti filters filter out the microns and the microorganisms and any leftover sediment down to 0.2 microns, allowing us to achieve a scientific level of clarity called brilliance, creating what we like to call smart wine because it's brilliant. This is our bottling line. Our bottling line requires the use of only 2 employees, one at the beginning and one at the end of the line. The whole operation starts down at this end where we load the conveyor belt with empty bottles of wine. As the conveyor belt moves the bottles down, it comes to this first station right here where the bottle is pumped full of nitrogen. Nitrogen pushes all the oxygen up out of the bottles, so we don't have any oxygen in our bottles until later on when that cork is popped and the wine is poured into your glass. After it gets its blast of nitrogen, it gets raised up onto a platform here where the nozzle is inserted into the neck of the bottle, and as it rotates clockwise, that bottle begins filling with wine. After it's done filling with wine, it'll be pushed over to this next station here. This nozzle here will be inserted into the neck of the bottle and give that bottle a second blast of nitrogen, just pushing any oxygen out of the head space, which is where the wine finishes filling and the cork needs to go in. After it gets that second blast of nitrogen, immediately we put a cork in it. The corks are dumped into the hopper at the top there, transferred down this tube, and pushed forward by that white piece. This steel rod will lift up and insert that cork into the neck of the bottle, hoping to make it flush with the top and not having it stick up out of the bottle or down too far into the bottle. Interesting fact about our corks, we don't use authentic cork. We use a cork called Noma cork. It's environmentally friendly, it has 0 carbon footprint, and we were the very first winery in Pennsylvania to start using Noma cork. After the cork is inserted, the conveyor belt moves it down to this station here where we put a decorative capsule on. That decorative capsule is that pull tab part you have to remove before reaching the cork. It gets flash heat fitted, and then immediately it gets carried over to here where our label is put on the bottle. Our label maker, the sensor reads the bottle, puts a label on the front side, spins the bottle, puts a label on the back, and then puts it down here at the end. Now the person down at this end has a very important job. He or she is in charge of quality control. They have to make sure that that heat-fitted capsule doesn't slide off the neck. They have to take a look at that label and make sure it's not creased, folded, ripped, making sure there's not only half a label or more than one label on there. Any bottles that don't pass the quality assurance check get put out to our tasting room where we pour samples and glasses of wine from. The wine's perfect, but the labeling and the appearance of the bottle isn't, so why waste good wine? Any wine that does pass the quality assurance check gets inserted into a case. The case gets put onto a pallet. Now we get 12 bottles per case, and we get about 70 cases per pallet. This process is pretty efficient Lots of noise, lots of things going on all at the same time. But even with just 2 people, we can bottle approximately 100 cases of wine per hour. That's 1,200 bottles. As soon as everything's done, gets put back into our storage area for distribution locally and throughout the country. Welcome to our operations area, where, as you can see behind me, we store our wine right after it's been bottled. We have 2 locations here, the Farm Winery location in Ortana, and our downtown Gettysburg wine shop right off of the Circle. We also distribute our wines to the state-owned liquor stores, more than 24 local grocery stores, restaurants, breweries, distilleries, and the like. We also can distribute our wines throughout Maryland in more than 115 locations. We also ship our wines to 12 states plus the District of Columbia. I don't know about you, but I'm hungry. Let's go see what Cassie has cooking up for lunch at our terrace.
When it comes to pairing wine with food, the first rule is to always drink what you enjoy. Today we are pairing our carnivore pizza with our 3 Ships to the Wind. 3 Ships to the Wind is a semi-sweet red that pairs well with all sorts of spicy food. It's well diverse, and with our carnivore pizza today, we have sausage, pepperoni, cheese, and even topped with bacon. The 3 Ships to the Wind will pair nicely and cut right through those fats. The subtle peppery notes in the 3 Ships goes well and brings out the flavors in the sausage and the pepperoni, where the sweetness of the wine will complement well with the saltiness of the bacon. The 3 Ships will also cut right through the fats of the meat and the cheese. We're also pairing with our 3 Ships to the Wind the pepper jack cheese, one of the specialty cheeses we get from a local farmer here in Pennsylvania. The peanut butter and jelly are a match made in heaven, and that's exactly what we have here for you today. Our award-winning Rebel Red, which is a Concord blend, and our peanut butter melt-away pretzel. Sweet needs sweet, so when preparing your menu for your dessert, make sure you're grabbing a wine that is as sweet or even sweeter than the dessert you have prepared.